What drives a young woman to defy an entire empire, to endure unimaginable torture, and to face death with an unshakable smile of faith? This is not an ordinary story of saints. It is an account of fire, blood, and a courage that not even hell itself could extinguish. In a Sicily dominated by power and oppression, there emerged a woman whose light continues to burn through the centuries. Her name, Agatha. Her legacy, indestructible. Chapter 1. The birth of a legend. On the sunlit island of Sicily, where the sea caresses the shores with an eternal whisper, Agatha was born around AD 235. Coming from a noble family, she was surrounded by luxuries that promised a life of privilege. However, from her very first days, there was something in her eyes that shone beyond gold and silk, a spark of the divine, an invisible fire that no earthly treasure could match. She grew up among marble columns and gardens, perfumed by the Mediterranean breeze, yet her heart was not attached to the pleasures of the world. While other girls dreamed of lavish weddings and glittering jewels, Agatha quietly listened to the stories of the early Christians, martyrs who preferred death rather than renounce their faith. Those stories planted a seed in her soul that would soon grow stronger than any empire. As the years passed, the little girl transformed into a young woman of dazzling beauty, with a presence that hypnotized both by her appearance and her serenity. Suitors came from all directions, drawn by her grace and noble lineage, but she rejected them one by one. Her heart already belonged to another, not to a man of flesh and blood, but to an eternal and unchangeable love, that of Christ. In an era when women were seen merely as pawns on a political board, Agatha broke the rules, not through rebellion, but with a faith so firm that it defied logic. Her family's pressure increased, yet her determination remained unshakable. Her life was not destined for banquet halls or arranged marriages. She was born for something greater, something that even she could not yet fully comprehend. But Agatha's destiny was not simply to live in holiness. Her story was written in the fire of sacrifice. For in the dark corners of power, someone had already set their eyes on her, someone whose desire would be the spark that ignited the fiercest tragedy of her life. Chapter 2. The Flame of Devotion, Agatha's Vow of Virginity. From a very young age, Agatha felt a calling that resonated louder than any human voice, the call to consecrate herself completely to God. It was not merely an act of piety, but a complete surrender of her being, a commitment sealed with a vow of virginity, something revolutionary for a woman of her status. In an intimate and solemn ceremony, she received the flammium, a red veil symbolizing her purity and devotion, given to her by the bishop of her community. The red color of the veil was not accidental. It represented both the passion of her love for Christ and the blood that, unbeknownst to her at the time, she would shed for that very commitment. Wearing the flammium was an act of courage, a silent yet powerful declaration that her body and soul belonged only to God. In every thread of that veil was woven the story of a woman who, if necessary, would defy the entire world. Agatha's life became a living testimony to her faith. She did not seclude herself or hide away. On the contrary, she actively served her Christian community, helping the needy, comforting the sick, and teaching the young. Her light shone in every corner of Sicily, a flame that even the shadow of Roman power over the Christians could not extinguish. But her devotion did not go unnoticed. Agatha's physical beauty and reputation for holiness began to attract the attention of those who saw in her not merely a woman, but a trophy of power. Among them was Quintian, a Roman governor whose unbridled ambition knew no limits. To him, Agatha was not a saint, but a challenge to his authority and his ego. Agatha's vow of virginity was not just an act of faith, it was a declaration of independence in a world that tried to control the destiny of women. And unbeknownst to her, that vow would be the spark that ignited the flame of her martyrdom. For some men cannot bear for a woman to say no, especially when that no is imbued with the force of an unshakable faith. Chapter 3. Deaconess and Servant, her role in the Christian community. Although Agatha came from a noble family, her heart was far from the arrogance of the elite. Rather than seeking worldly honors, she humbly embraced her role as a deaconess in the Sicilian Christian community. At a time when Christianity was still developing in the shadow of the Roman Empire, being a deaconess was not just a title. It was a vocation that required courage, dedication, and above all, unconditional love for one's neighbor. Her work went far beyond mere acts of charity. Agatha cared for the sick, fed the hungry, and consoled the afflicted. Her presence was a balm for wounded hearts, and her faith a light guiding many through the darkness of persecution. To her, there was no distinction between rich and poor. All were brothers and sisters, children of the same God. It was in this daily service that Agatha found her true greatness, not in her lineage, but in her capacity to love without measure. Through her teachings, she inspired not only women but also men, young and old. Her words had the power to transform lives, not through eloquence, but through the purity of her conviction. Every gesture, every act of kindness was a living prayer. In her example, many found the courage to embrace Christianity, even though it might cost them their lives. However, her growing influence did not go unnoticed by the Roman authorities. In a society where power was maintained through control, a free, independent, and devout woman represented a threat. Agatha did not openly defy the empire, but her very existence was an act of resistance. Her faith was a fire that Quincian's government longed to extinguish, fearing that her light might spark rebellion in other hearts. Yet Agatha did not fear the powerful. Her life was anchored in a certainty that went beyond human laws. She knew that true power did not reside in gold or weapons, but in the ability to love, to serve, and, if necessary, to suffer for the truth. And though she did not yet know it, that humble service would be the prelude to the greatest sacrifice that was yet to come. Chapter 4. Quincian, the governor who sought to tame a saint. Quincian, the Roman governor of Sicily, was a man used to getting what he wanted. His authority was unquestioned, and his power backed by the relentless machinery of the empire. However, there was something about Agatha that defied his control, a hidden force that neither his orders nor his wealth could subdue. To him, Agatha's no was not just a personal rejection, but an affront to his power, a challenge that needed to be crushed. The governor had already heard about the young Christian, her beauty, her virtue, and her influence within the community. Upon meeting her, he could not resist her charm, but what intrigued him most was her resistance. Agatha did not look at him with fear or admiration. Her gaze reflected an unshakable peace, as if he, with all his power, were nothing more than a passing shadow on her path to eternity. Obsessed with possessing her, Quincian attempted to seduce her with promises of wealth and privilege. He offered her a life of luxury, palaces filled with marble and glittering jewels. But Agatha, steadfast in her faith, rejected each offer with a calm that only enraged the governor further. It was not a no given in fear or hesitation. It was an absolute no, born of a conviction that no man could break. Wounded in his pride, Quincian decided that if he could not win her over with compliments, he would do so by force. He ordered her arrest, expecting that the fear of prison and torture would bend her will. Yet Agatha, even when chained, maintained the same defiant serenity. Her resistance was not an act of political rebellion, it was a spiritual declaration. Her soul belonged to no man. It belonged solely to God. Quincian's obsession with Agatha was not merely personal, it was also symbolic. He wanted to prove that even the purest of women could be subdued by the power of the empire. What he did not understand was that Agatha's true strength did not lie in her body, but in her spirit. And that spirit was about to face trials that would reveal the fragility of earthly power in the face of the unyielding faith of a martyr. Chapter 5. Rejection and retribution. The beginning of Agatha's martyrdom. Agatha's no not only wounded Quintian's pride, but also unleashed in him a thirst for vengeance. In his mind, a woman's refusal was an insult that must be severely punished, a challenge to his authority demanding an exemplary response. It was not enough to simply imprison her. He wanted to break her, not only physically, but also spiritually, until she pleaded for her life and dignity. Yet what he did not know was that Agatha's soul already belonged to a realm where his power held no sway. Agatha was torn from her home and handed over to a woman named Aphrodisia, a courtesan notorious for her cruelty and perversion. Quintian's plan was simple: to corrupt Agatha, to destroy her purity by forcing her to renounce her faith through humiliation and degradation. Day after day, Aphrodisia attempted to seduce her with worldly pleasures, pressuring her to accept a life of luxury in exchange for her soul. But Agatha, unyielding, resisted every attempt with the strength of her faith, like a rock standing firm against the waves of the sea. Quintian's frustration grew with every report of her insubordination. If seduction failed, he would resort to violence. She was brought before a tribunal, where she was offered one last chance to save her life, to worship the Roman gods and renounce Christ. Agatha's response was clear and firm. "My freedom is not in your power, nor does my faith bow before idols of stone. I recognize only one Lord, and it is He who gives me the strength to face any torment." Faced with such defiance, Quintian ordered her torture. The young woman was whipped mercilessly, her cries stifled by her determination not to grant her tormentor the satisfaction of seeing her broken. Her body began to bear the marks of her suffering, but her spirit shone even more brightly. Every lash was a physical wound, yes, but also a testament to her unshakable love for God, a resounding echo of her resistance that would be heard long after her flesh ceased to bleed. Agatha's suffering was not merely a punishment. It was a trial that exposed the brutality of Roman power and the fragility of Quintian's ego. While her body was tortured, her soul soared, free from the chains imposed upon her. In every tear shed, in every groan of pain, there was a silent yet deafening declaration. True strength does not reside in dominating others, but in the capacity to remain true to oneself, even in the face of death. Chapter 6. The unbearable pain, the brutal torture, and the removal of her breasts. Quintian's cruelty reached its peak when, frustrated by Agatha's unyielding faith, he ordered one of the most atrocious tortures ever recorded: to tear her breasts away with red-hot iron tongs. In the governor's twisted logic, mutilating the symbol of her femininity would be the final blow to break her spirit. Yet he did not understand that Agatha's true power did not reside in her body, but in the invisible strength of her soul. The act was carried out publicly, a spectacle intended to instill fear among the Christians and to bolster the governor's ego. Agatha's screams filled the air, a heart-wrenching sound that pierced the hearts of all who witnessed such barbarity. However, even amid the unbearable pain, her words rang out with an almost supernatural clarity. "Do you not shame yourself to mutilate in a woman what your own mother once gave you to nourish you?" With this phrase, she transformed her suffering into a powerful accusation, exposing the vileness of her oppressor before everyone. The physical pain was indescribable, yet for Agatha, every wound was a reminder of her sacrifice for something greater than her own life. While her body bled, her faith remained intact, defying human logic. She was returned to her cell, disfigured but with a dignity that neither iron nor fire could destroy. Her ravaged body became a living altar, a testimony to the power of faith over flesh. Miraculously, in the midst of her agony, tradition recounts that an elderly man, accompanied by a child, appeared in her cell. The old man was none other than Saint Peter, who, with a heavenly touch, miraculously healed her wounds. Her mutilated breasts healed as if the fire and the iron had never touched her skin. This act not only comforted Agatha, but also sent a clear message to her torturers. They could harm her body, but they would never possess her soul. But Quintian, blinded by his rage, did not stop there. The fury of seeing that his tortures failed to break Agatha drove him to order an even more cruel punishment. Yet every new torment only strengthened the legend of the young martyr, whose suffering was not in vain. In every drop of blood shed, in every scar, there was a seed of hope planted in the hearts of those who witnessed her Calvary. Chapter 7. Fire and Faith. The final ordeal on the burning coals. Quintian, consumed by frustration and rage, could no longer bear Agatha's resistance. His tortures had failed to break her, and her miraculous healing only inflamed the devotion of those around her. The governor knew he could not allow his defeat to go unpunished. If he could neither possess her nor subdue her, he would destroy her. Thus, in his final attempt to tame her, he ordered that she be thrown onto burning coals, a punishment reserved for those who defied the empire. The guards dragged her to the place of execution, while horrified citizens watched the cruel fate that awaited her. Her wounds still marked her body, but her face showed no fear, only a serene peace. For Agatha, the fire was not a punishment, but the final test before reaching eternal glory. She allowed herself to be cast upon the coals without resistance, her flesh burning upon contact with the flames, while her spirit soared beyond earthly pain. As her body burned, her voice rose for the last time, not in cries of agony, but in a prayer. Lord, you who created me, protected me from childhood, and gave me the strength to resist. Receive my soul, for the time has come for me to leave this world and partake in your mercy. Her words echoed among the crowd, a declaration of victory amid suffering. Then the unthinkable occurred. The earth shook as if the very heavens responded to her cry. The fire suddenly died out, and horror seized the executioners. Fearing that divine retribution might befall them, they pulled Agatha from the flames and returned her to her cell. But her body could bear no more. With her final breath, she closed her eyes and surrendered her soul, her complete martyrdom, her mission fulfilled. It was February 5th, AD 251, and in that dark cell, surrounded by ashes and scars, a saint was born. It was not death that transformed her into a legend, but her unyielding faith, her determination to stand firm before the power of men. Saint Agatha was not defeated, she was immortalized, and her story, written in blood and fire, would continue to burn in the hearts of those who remembered her. Chapter 8. The Last Words of a Martyr. An Immortal Testimony. In the darkness of her cell, with a broken body but an intact soul, Agatha awaited the end of her martyrdom. The cold stone floor seemed indifferent to her suffering, yet in her heart burned a flame that neither torture nor abandonment could extinguish. She knew that her death would not be a defeat, but a gateway to eternal life. Her voice, weakened by pain, still found the strength to utter words that would be forever engraved in the memory of those who heard them. Lord, you who created me and protected me since childhood, who gave me courage in my youth and freed me from worldly pleasures, who preserved my body from corruption and granted me the virtue of patience amid torment. Receive my spirit now, for the time has come for me to leave this world and enjoy your mercy. These words, filled with a supernatural serenity, were not cries of despair, but declarations of victory. Agatha did not plead for her life. She surrendered her soul with the certainty that the pain was temporary, but the glory would be eternal. The guards, accustomed to seeing their victims beg for mercy, were astonished by this young woman who died with a peace that defied the logic of suffering. In her final breath, Agatha became a living symbol of resistance and faith. Her exhausted body relaxed, but her face retained a serene, almost angelic expression, as if she had found rest in God's embrace. Her death, far from extinguishing her light, made it shine even more brightly. inspiring those who witnessed her martyrdom to embrace Christianity with renewed fervor. The echo of her words spread beyond the prison walls, traveling from mouth to mouth, from heart to heart, until it became an immortal testimony. It was not just the story of a martyr, but the legacy of a woman who, in the midst of the most excruciating pain, chose faith over fear, love over hatred, and eternity over earthly life. Her testimony did not end with her death. Every time her name was spoken, every time her story was told, Agatha was reborn. For martyrs do not die, they transform into eternal flames that illuminate the darkness of the centuries. Chapter 9. From Suffering to Veneration, the popular canonization of Saint Agatha. Agatha's body, marked by violence and fire, was prepared for burial by the Christian community of Catania. But what began as an act of farewell quickly transformed into the birth of a veneration that defied the power of the empire. People did not go to her tomb merely to weep, but to pay homage to a woman whose faith had overcome the terror of Rome. Her martyrdom became a symbol of hope for all the oppressed. Although Christianity was still being persecuted, Agatha's name began to be venerated almost immediately. She needed neither papal decrees nor formal canonization processes. It was the people, inspired by her story, who proclaimed her a saint. Her tomb became a pilgrimage site, a place where the faithful not only prayed but also found solace, strength, and, according to reports, miracles. The cult of Saint Agatha grew rapidly, defying imperial prohibitions. Her image came to be represented with a red veil, a symbol of her consecration, and a tray holding her own breasts, not as a macabre reminder of her torture, but as an emblem of her courage and unshakable dignity. The palm of martyrdom she holds reflects her spiritual victory over death. Over the years, her devotion spread beyond Sicily, reaching every corner of the Christian world. Cathedrals, churches, and altars were dedicated in her honor, and her story became a fundamental part of the Church's tradition. Her life and death inspired generations of Christians to remain faithful, even in the face of adversity. But what was even more extraordinary was not merely the growth of her veneration, but how her example transformed the perception of female power in early Christianity. Agatha was not remembered as a victim, but as a spiritual warrior, a woman whose inner strength transcended her time and culture, leaving a legacy that endures to this day. Chapter 10. Miracles of Fire and Faith, the veil that stopped the lava of Etna. 1 year after Agatha's martyrdom, Mount Etna, the imposing volcano of Sicily, erupted. The earth trembled with fury, and rivers of incandescent lava flowed down its slopes, threatening to destroy the city of Catania. The fire, like an unleashed beast, consumed everything in its path. The inhabitants, terrified, knew that their human efforts were futile against the fury of nature. In their desperation, people remembered Agatha, the young martyr who had defied a power far more cruel than lava itself, the tyranny of men. Confident in her celestial intercession, they rushed to her tomb, carrying with them her sacred veil, that same red veil that symbolized her consecration. With desperate yet steadfast faith, they raised it before the advancing river of fire, and then a miracle occurred. The lava, which until that moment had ravaged everything in its path, suddenly and inexplicably halted exactly at the spot where Agatha's veil was displayed. The fire, which neither the sea nor the earth could contain, respected the symbol of a woman whose spirit continued to protect her people even after death. The astonishment was complete. No rational explanation could justify what had happened. This event not only saved the city, but also solidified Agatha's fame as a powerful saint, capable of interceding both in heaven and on earth. The news of the miracle spread quickly, and her figure transcended the limits of Sicily, becoming a symbol of protection against fires, volcanic eruptions, and any natural disaster. From that day on, at every eruption of Etna, the inhabitants of Catania turned to Agatha, carrying her veil in solemn processions. The miracle was not only an act of divine intervention, but a reminder that faith can halt even the most uncontrollable forces of nature. Agatha, the young martyr, had become the eternal guardian of her city. Her story teaches us that true power does not reside in brute strength, but in unyielding faith. For when the fire of the earth threatens to consume everything, it is the flame of the Spirit that can truly save us. Chapter 11. Saint Agatha and the protection of women's health, more than a symbol. Saint Agatha is venerated not only as a martyr, her story has transcended to become a symbol of strength and protection, especially regarding women's health. Her martyrdom, which included the brutal mutilation of her breasts, transformed her suffering into an act of resistance and dignity, inspiring women all over the world to find strength in their faith during the most difficult moments. It is no coincidence that today she is considered the patroness of women facing breast diseases such as breast cancer and a powerful intercessor in the fight for the health and integrity of the female body. Prayers addressed to Saint Agatha are not merely supplications for physical healing. They also represent a cry for emotional and spiritual healing. For many women, facing an illness like breast cancer is not just a medical battle, but a challenge that affects self-esteem, identity, and their relationship with their own body. In this context, Agatha appears as a beacon of hope, a figure who understands pain in its rawest form, yet also illustrates the ability to overcome suffering with dignity. Devotion to her is expressed through novenas, special masses, and blessing rituals, in which her intercession is invoked for the healing of diseases and the protection of health. The relics, images, and symbols associated with Saint Agatha, such as the tray holding her breasts, cease to be a macabre reminder of her torture and become an emblem of her resilience. They remind us that while the body may be wounded, the soul that rests in faith is invulnerable. Beyond her role as a protector of physical health, Saint Agatha is also seen as a defender of women's dignity. Her story has inspired movements of women fighting against gender violence, exploitation, and oppression, making her a symbol of spiritual empowerment and resistance against injustice. In many places, her feast is an opportunity to reflect on women's rights and the importance of respecting their bodies and choices. Saint Agatha's legacy teaches us that pain can transform into power. Her life and martyrdom testify that even in the midst of the most extreme suffering, it is possible to find purpose, a voice, and an inner strength that transcends adversity. Her story is not merely an echo of the past, it is a cry of hope for the present and future of all women who fight for their health and dignity. Chapter 12. The Legacy of a Martyr, Lessons of Courage and Faith for Today. The legacy of Saint Agatha is not confined to churches bearing her name, nor to relics kept in cathedrals around the world. Its true impact lies in the hearts of millions of people who, centuries after her martyrdom, continue to find in her story a source of inspiration and strength. Agatha is not just a figure of the past. She is an eternal example of how faith and courage can endure even in the face of the most devastating trials. In a world where injustice, violence, and oppression still exist, her life reminds us of the importance of remaining steadfast in our principles, even when it means facing pain or scorn. Agatha did not fight with weapons, nor did she raise banners of revolution. Her resistance was silent yet powerful, founded on the conviction that truth and personal dignity are worth more than any concession to fear or power. Her martyrdom also invites us to reflect on the role of suffering in human life. Rather than seeing it only as tragedy, Agatha transformed her pain into an offering of love and fidelity to her ideals. She teaches us that suffering, though sometimes inevitable, need not be the end of the story. It can be the beginning of a legacy, the spark that ignites faith and hope in others. Today, her figure resonates not only in religious circles, but also in social and cultural contexts. She is a symbol of the struggle for women's rights, of resistance against oppression, and of the human capacity to find meaning even in the midst of adversity. The lessons of her life are universal: the importance of integrity, the value of faith, and the strength of a spirit that refuses to be broken. Remembering Saint Agatha is more than honoring a saint. It is an act of connecting with humanity in its purest form. She challenges us to ask, why do we fight? Why are we willing to suffer? And what legacy do we want to leave behind? Agatha has already answered these questions with her life. Now it is up to us to find our own answers, inspired by the light she left burning for eternity. Prayer to Saint Agatha. O glorious Saint Agatha, valiant martyr and eternal testimony of unshakable faith, you who endured the cruelest pain without ever renouncing your love for Christ, hear our prayer today, filled with hope and trust in your powerful intercession. You who were the protector of the vulnerable and the defender of dignity, guide our hearts so that we may never fear to remain steadfast in the truth. Intercede for all women who suffer, for those facing illness, especially for those who fight for their health and the integrity of their bodies. Grant us the strength that dwelled in your Spirit, so that in the midst of our trials we may find peace and courage. Help us remember that even if the body may be wounded, the soul that trusts in God will never be defeated. Saint Agatha, light in the darkness, intercede for us before the Lord, that we may live by faith, love with purity, and face each challenge with the same valor you demonstrated. For Christ our Lord. Amen.